Welcome everyone, my name is Frank Castillo. So glad you could be with us today. It's a beautiful sunny day here in the Low Country. And in our session today, we'll be talking about the office of tomorrow. And it comes as no surprise after the pandemic, and even before the pandemic, we saw quite a shift from working in an office to remote work. So we'll try to go ahead and unravel all of the different elements associated with what I personally feel is the office of tomorrow. We'll first cover some trends in working remotely and working in an office environment. We'll consider technology and the impact that also has on us as we choose to work from a central location out to remote areas. CPA evolution is the new CPA licensure model, and we'll also talk about how that impacts us going forward in terms of staffing and structure and training. And lastly, I'll make some predictions and talk a little bit about the reality of office workspaces and what I see as a model for working together in the short and actually in the long term as well. So before we get right into it, let's first cover some of the learning objectives that we want to make sure we cover in our session today. We'll identify key trends concerning work from the office versus remote work. We'll also recall tips employees can use to become efficient in their everyday work. We'll identify proposed changes to the CPA licensure model, and we'll recall what impact remote workspaces will have on the office of tomorrow. So plenty to get going on, so let's just jump right in. We'll first talk about some trends as it relates to the workplace, working at home versus working remotely. And what we find is that based on the U.S. Census Bureau, that approximately 4.7 million people, which make up about 3.4% of the U.S. workforce, were already working remotely before the pandemic took the world by storm. And this is up about 1% from 2015. Additionally, 88% of the organizations worldwide made it mandatory or encouraged their employees to work from home after the pandemic was declared. Similarly, 44% of companies globally don't allow remote work, but when you consider that number, it means that 56% do offer some form of telecommuting opportunities. Additionally, 52% of global employees work remotely once a week. 68% do so at least once per month. When we look at commuting and the impact that has on our psyche and our ability to function, it's quite telling. When we look at New York across the statistics that were revealed in this one study were from all across the country, but I decided to pull different corners of the country, and this doesn't necessarily just represent the metro areas. This is a blended average by state. So New York leads the list. This represents 33.6 minutes each way. So this is well over an hour every single day. And again, that's across the entire state. So you would imagine that New York City would carry the brunt of that average and pull it up compared to the rest of the state. But the same holds true when we look at California, Illinois, Virginia, and even Hawaii and metro Honolulu area is terrible as it relates to traffic. And this is one of the driving factors that led us to work from home prior to the pandemic taking off. And I think, as we'll talk about a little later in our session today, this is one of the telling features and one of the real reasons why we are not anxious in any sort of way to get back to working strictly in an office environment and having to battle traffic. I can tell you stories from when I was living in Boston, and I would remember putting on the news at 5:30 in the morning, flicking it on, and seeing the traffic map, and it was already red at 5:30 in the morning. And that tells you that many people sitting in that traffic would opt to work at home if they have the chance, and will continue to do so. Some statistics as we look at work and the frequency of remote work. And this really plays into 2020 and what was taking place in the pandemic. So early on, understand in March and April, there was such a sense of unknown that we didn't know exactly what would take place. Everything was shut down. But as we went through the summer and fall months, we do have some statistics from the Bureau of Labor showing us that early on we saw the frequency of remote work was very high in the beginning and started to peter off, so that by September, 33% of the workforce frequently had remote work, whereas 25% sometimes, and then never. So even from April through September, which was still in periods of not having a vaccine and not having much in the way of remedy associated with the pandemic and the virus, we still found 42% of individuals getting never working remotely. Also, the percentage of workers working on site, same sort of trend, that nearly 46% by the time we get to September of 2020, we find that individuals are reporting back to the office, where it was at about 28% in April. Similarly, for those individuals working on site, very few or none, we start to see those numbers sort of peter off. Now, the percentage of workers concerned about COVID at work, it's a mixed bag. It's pretty much split 50-50 when they think about it. Maybe this is a political thing. Maybe this just has to do with individual situations and how people react differently to the virus within their family, within their own individual situation. But 53% weren't worried at all about catching COVID at work back in May, and 47% felt very strongly that they were concerned about it. And those numbers have been very consistent throughout. Now, this is a telling slide, and we're talking about the percentage of individuals, the worker preference associated with work at office versus working remotely. We find statistically, even through the ups and downs of the pandemic, that the numbers are relatively split. We have roughly a third of the individuals who would prefer to work in an office, 25% would work remotely, and 42% would work remote as it relates to COVID. And I think what we find is the previous slide that we talked about, that talked about a 50-50 split. I think that's where we're at. We have some people who really enjoy working from their home situation. They can get a whole lot of work done, but at the same time, we have people who want to be back in an office situation. And we'll cover this in some more detail also in just a bit, but I think that particular trend will continue to grow, that there will be this tendency to want to get back into an office situation, to be around people. I know we're in the summer 2021 now, and everyone feels a little bit more comfortable being around each other. Seeing the laughter and the smiles is terribly important to us, and to be engaged with other individuals, because on some level, the work that we do has to not only just be that maintenance type of work, the everyday stuff that hits our inbox and gets out the door, but we truly need to collaborate. We truly need to brainstorm on new ideas, how to grow our practices or our businesses, to get that spontaneous input from other individuals that is very difficult to do in a Zoom type situation, because typically a Zoom call or something, a Skype or any alternative to that, is a structured event that someone would normally put that together to be able to have an agenda to go through north to south on particular bullet points. But having that interaction with people on the fly is terribly important. And I think that businesses are starting to realize that there's true value associated with that, and the value that not only happens in a collective situation, but individually, for selfish reasons, we want to demonstrate our value. And if a lot of what we've provided over time is that level of spontaneous input that then becomes the genesis of creating new products or a new service line, then we want to be around people. We want to make sure that that becomes part of the norm.